Hello? Okay, are we back on? I hope so. So here we are, calling in from the Laboratory of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York, and we have discovered this past winter that the puffins are wintering off the shore of Cape Cod, about 200 miles southeast of Cape Cod, in the edge of the continental shelf. Most of the winter, from late October through April, they spend their time floating out there, feeding at sea. They don't come to land at all during that period. Then they come to shore to breed during the breeding season. It doesn't take them very long to fly from the edge of the Cape Cod offshore over the coral canyons and seamounts. They fly at about 50 miles an hour, and so I suspect in a good day they're back off the mid-coast Maine islands where they can set up nesting habitat. They arrive all about the same time. They float offshore in rafts, then they come ashore and start claiming their nesting habitat. So we are organizing now, hoping to send our full complement of students out to the islands in mid-May. About the same time, we'll open up the Puffin cams on Seal Island, and it's shaping up to be a very exciting season. We're moving forward thanks to Explore.org with all the cameras we had last year, and we may even, if we're lucky, get one set up on some cormorants this year, which is exciting news for us. So I'm happy to share the latest news with you, and make sure if you're just tuning in with us that you know that this is Steve Kress. I'm the director of Project Puffin, founder of it, and I've been working with puffins on the Maine coast now for 42 years. Looking forward to our 43rd year. So a little background about why Project Puffin started. The history of it is that puffins bred off the coast of Maine in fairly large numbers, at least until the early 1800s, but there was a lot of hunting of seabirds along that coast in those days. And people would go out to the seabird nesting islands, they would hunt the birds for meat and take their eggs, and they were tame and fairly easy to catch, and this resulted in the extirpation, that is the loss of all the puffin colonies along the Maine coast, except for one pair that seemed to have survived on Matinicus Rock. That's in about 1902, just one pair of puffins were breeding there. That colony continued to thrive, but no new colonies established themselves until Project Puffin began trying to bring the puffins back to eastern Egg Rock, the southernmost of the historic Maine colonies. We did the same thing on Seal Island where the cameras are at. In total, about 2,000 puffins were brought from Newfoundland to Maine between 1973 through 1986. About 1,000 to eastern Egg Rock, about 1,000 to Seal Island. They were hand-reared, they were released, they headed off to sea. And that is what the background was of the project. And they recolonized following this method of hand-rearing chicks and releasing them. Some of them came back to Egg Rock. They bred there first in 1981, and they bred first at Seal Island in 1986. So let's see. My friends at Explore.org are sending me some questions to share with you. And I think I've answered a couple of the background ones. And we've talked about the techniques, hand rearing and releasing. That's called translocation. We also use decoys, models of puffins, setting them up on rocks, floating them in the water. And these techniques have been used worldwide now in at least 14 countries that I know of, including birds as small as diving petrels in the southern hemisphere, little tiny decoys. This summer they're using parakeet auklet decoys up in Alaska, sound recordings I know of about 50 species of seabirds now that have been aided by using these methods, which is very heartening. Sometimes birds as big as albatross decoys are being put out to help encourage birds to breed in safe places. So this is all very proactive. It's all very positive work, trying to help birds to live in safe spots, where they're safe from predators, where they're safe from volcanic eruptions. A new threat is ocean level rise, where they're safe from oceans that are rising in response to melting polar ice. So I had no idea when this project started that these methods would have such broad application, but they do. And I'm so happy to share it with you on this conversation today on Earth Day. Earth Day is a time to reflect on our planet, to think about what we can do. And I had no idea what I've been able to do over the years. First coming up with the methods, demonstrating they work with puffins, and now seeing how these same methods are helping other seabirds survive on our watery planet. The ocean, of course, is 3/4 water. It's called Earth, but some say it should be called sea because of that. And the most common birds on the planet are the seabirds. Out of sight and out of mind, but we're here to help them. So our colonies today are growing, I'm happy to say. We have restored puffins on 2 of those historic islands and helped them to further flourish on Seal Island, on Matinicus Rock, where that first pair survived. There are about 1,100 pairs, I would say, off the Maine coast these days, nesting on our 5 islands. 5 nesting islands where puffins nest. So the colonies are healthy. In most years, they produce 1 chick per nest. In a good year, about 80% of the nests will produce a fledgling. And a bad year, only about 10%. But on average, we're probably seeing 50 to 60% of the nest producing a healthy chick. The condition of the chick is something that we are now realize is a very good indicator of the health of the waters around the islands. We just published a paper yesterday in a scientific journal called Facets, and that paper points out that puffins' chicks over the long term have been fledging with lighter weight than in the past. In the early part of our study, back in the early 1990s, about 80% of the chicks were returning. Now only about 50-60% of the chicks are returning. This is sobering news, but it's highly variable. And that's also a response of it. Why is that changing? It's changing because of the availability of the forage fish that the puffins are feeding on, the kinds of fish, the length of the fish, the size of the fish, and even the nutritional value of the fish to the birds varies from year to year, and that can be affected by waters. Some years the fish is much richer than others, may be related to sea surface temperature. So some current threats. We have the old threats. People are, in the historic ways that people were a threat to puffins, going out and shooting them and taking their eggs. Happily, the birds are not protected, so that problem is solved. But people still affect puffins in some ways, in even a more sobering way, and that is through overfishing their food supplies, taking too much food out of the ocean so that the puffin chicks may not get enough food. Other threats are plastics. Huge amounts of plastics blow into the oceans. Some of it's dumped off boats, but a lot of it just floats right down the rivers. Bits of plastics stay in the ocean forever, and they get into the food chain, and they can be toxic to fish and to seabirds. The plastics, that is. And the big change since Project Puffin started is the climate change. the warming of the oceans. The Gulf of Maine is one of the most quickly warming bodies of water. And when there's warmer water, that means it's less productive, and means there's less fish, and the fish may not be as close to the puffin colonies as they used to be, all of which affects nesting success. The last 2 seasons have been very successful for Maine puffins because the water has been relatively cold and cold enough to favor a healthy growth of plankton, which then feed the small fish. Here's a question, what can I do to help conserve seabirds? You know, seabirds being out of sight and out of mind and living on these remote islands, it may not seem so obvious, the things that we can do. But some of the things I've mentioned already are things we do have control over. For example, fisheries. Fish stocks need to be managed successfully, and fish habitat needs to be managed. One of the hopes is that there will be a national marine sanctuary set up offshore at the edge of the continental shelf. We're hoping that President Obama will make that so before he leaves office. This could protect the rich habitats of corals and forage fish, all habitat that's necessary for puffins to survive in the winter. They come to land just for about 3 months of the year, but discovering where this site is, where they breed, is really a terrific discovery because that's where they spend most of the year. They're seabirds. They drink salt water. They eat small fish. They need habitat at sea if they're going to survive to come back to land in a healthy enough condition to lay an egg and to raise that chick. So the condition of this Coral Canyons area, protecting that, is vital to them even getting in a good enough condition to be able to lay an egg. Remember this, that it takes about, a female, an egg is about 20% of her body weight, and it takes a lot of food for her to feed on, to be able to be healthy enough to lay that big egg. And it's got to be laid early enough in the season. It should be laid by late April in order for the chick to have the full 3 months of incubation and chick rearing necessary to fledge successfully. If she lays it too late, there may not be enough time. Okay, let's continue on here. We've got some new questions coming in. And so the question is, what is the concern about the timing of the phytoplankton bloom? What a great question. Somebody's really reading our information here. The spring phytoplankton bloom, the timing of it, is what kicks off the whole breeding cycle. That means that if a puffin is, if the phytoplankton is too late in blooming, then the forage fish will find as much food. There's synchrony of what goes on. In other words, if the forage fish that the puffins are feeding on are migrating up into the Gulf of Maine, they're not generally hatched right there. The little white hake are actually produced in deep water and offshore. They begin a migration that has to coincide with the blooming of the phytoplankton. It's a beautiful thing when all of this comes together. So you've got your phytoplankton blooming early, and it should coincide with the migration of the small fish that fatten up and then are there when the eggs are being produced by the female and when they are there to feed the small puffins chicks in the burrow. If this phytoplankton bloom is too late, it may not be in synchrony with the arrival of the fish. Or if the phytoplankton bloom is too small, there's not enough food to feed these small fish, which then feed the puffins. So that's the connection between the spring phytoplankton bloom. In 2013, when only 10% of the puffin chicks reached fledging age, there just was not enough phytoplankton to feed the small fish, and there just was not enough food for the puffin chicks as a result of that. So timing and size of the plankton bloom really drives the whole system, and that has a lot to do with the sea surface temperature. And it all has a lot to do with the runoff of rain and snow off the mainland as well. Joy was banded last year. Any information on how she is doing? You know, I've been asking these Puffins to send us emails. No, I'm just kidding. We don't know. I have no clue. I wish I did. But she's going to stay at sea for at least 2 years. And she will be at sea, and we just don't know if she'll come back at all, but she'll have her first chance to come back in 2 years after the time she fledges, if all goes well. She's probably out on the Coral Canyons, I would guess, right now. But one thing we don't know at all, we know a little bit about where the adults go now, about this beautiful place called the Coral Canyons. But we don't know where the young Puffins go. We haven't put bands on them, and I wouldn't necessarily assume they go to the same place as the adults. That's another project for the future, perhaps. So, although that project is way down the line, because these geolocators have to be, you have to recapture the bird and take it off. And the chance of recapturing a bird are slim. So let me continue on with some of these great questions. Will there be more than one Puffin cam set up this season with the money raised? You know, the money for the Puffin cams is a grant from explore.org. The money that we raise helps us to put the interns on the islands, like Keenan, who some of you met last summer. And good news, he's coming back this year. So that's what we fundraise for, and anyone that would like to help can do that online through projectpuffin.org. There is a separate fund for cameras, maybe that's what this person's referring to, for motion detection cameras, and we do hope to put some of those out to take pictures of the birds to determine how many feedings we're getting per day. That's another measure of the abundance of food at sea. There's a question. Dr. Kress, do you think that since we are pretty much at the height of El Nino right now, that it will be more difficult for the puffins and other seabirds on the island to be able to find adequate food supply close in? Boy, these are great questions. Well, El Nino is affected all the oceans, and including the Atlantic, and sea surface temperatures already are warmer than they were last year at this time. This is causing some concerns and some predictions that we may be looking at a rerun of the summer of 2012, where we had warmer sea surfaces. It's not just the sea surface, though, it's the subsurface. Subsurface temperatures also affect puffins because that affects the currents of nutrient flows into the islands. So here we are, we haven't started the field season, the observers are not out there yet, the interns are not there, the puffins are just coming back. The good news is there was no wash-ups of puffins on Cape Cod as there were in the winter of 2013. That was an indication that that was the winter of 2012. We didn't see any puffins washing up emaciated like we did in 2012. So hopefully they are in good shape. What they find when they get back to the Gulf of Maine and the waters around their islands, they feed around about a 12-mile diameter around the island. We don't have that information yet. So, questions: how many of the new solar cameras will be using this year at the burrows? Oh, that's, I think, a question referring to the Razoo cameras. We have two cameras that we've been able to purchase. I'd like to purchase more, though. These are cameras that will detect the movements of puffins in and out. That's very key to this, I think, knowing how many feedings per day. It's not only what kinds of fish. There was a big worry about too much butterfish. Butterfish are not a problem if there's enough white hake and sand lance and herring coming in, and there's enough feedings during the day. So dropping a few butterfish in the burrow is not a problem, but if that's the only thing coming in, then the butterfish becomes a problem. What's happening on the legislative end for the sustainability of forage fish? Another great question. We have, I think, the forage fish populations are being regulated by the fisheries management boards, and right now, most of the fish are being taken. Over 90% of the allowable catch is caught, and then last year, 92% of the herring in Zone 1A were taken, and they closed the season. So the season can be closed if they reach the limit. There is a move afoot to incorporate more what's called ecological-based fisheries management, which takes into effect the needs of other wildlife. And this is the hopeful direction that this is going to go. Up to this point, fisheries limits are based more on just how much fish we think is out there, and how much fish of a certain species without consideration of the other species, like puffins. There's a question, do you take volunteers? We do take some volunteers. I think we're all set for this year, but volunteers that are interested in this really should get in touch with us in January or February when we're setting up the schedules. But we do take volunteers. The kind of people that would enjoy that the most are not just Puffin people, but they gotta like wilderness camping, living in tents, sleeping on hard tent platforms, being able to live in a foggy, raining environment. It takes a hardy soul to live on these offshore islands. Why is it so hard to see for zoos to keep puffins? Well, puffins require very fresh water. They require clean water, very expensive exhibits, and the lighting has to be just right. The food has to be just right, and if all that is working, then the puffins can thrive. But those are expensive infrastructures, and most zoos seem to prefer penguins over puffins if you're going to invest in that level. But there's a few zoos that keep puffins, but they don't seem to be as beautiful in my eye as the wild puffins. It's hard to get them to have the bright colored beaks, and that probably has to do with subtle variations in the amount of daylight, quality of light, and the food. But some of them breed in captivity, and therefore they must be doing well. Why? Okay, here's another question. We're waiting for more questions. Anybody out there have any more questions? These are great questions so far. While we're waiting for questions to come in, let me just say that I'm so happy that so many people care about puffins. When we started this project, there weren't many people. Now there's people all over the world watching puffins and caring about puffins. And by caring about the puffins, they're caring about the oceans. We hope people will continue to follow the work of Project Puffin, that they will do things like adopt a puffin. They'll come to the Audubon camp on Hog Island, where I teach courses during the summer, and we can talk about this in person. That would be a lot of fun. Come to Maine, do a puffin watching tour. Most of all, think about your own habitats near your home. Think about things you can do, like the kinds of eating sustainable food, about making sure that the plastics don't escape into our waterways. Think about voting for people that care about the planet. And think about connecting and reconnecting. And think about having conversations with your friends. This is all about communication. And the more people that care, the more likely the puffins will survive into the future. I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to encourage you to keep an eye on our puffin cams. You know, Rachel and Steve are back on Hog Island already, and that's a hopeful sign that spring is here, that the bird cam season is with us. So thank you again for being part of Explore.org and of Project Puffin. Thank you.